Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. I'm Adam Turvitt from the SpiderOak Customer Success Team, and today I'm really excited to have Mike Finch from DuckDuckGo here on the webinar. So today is a really important topic, and I'm excited that Mike's here because he can address this on a number of different levels, but our topic is privacy while you're surfing the web, and specifically while you're searching the internet. This is important, and just to start off, I want to give you a little bit of background on what I do. Here at SpiderOak, I'm a marketer, and generally when you meet someone who says I'm in marketing, you should go boo, hiss. All right, we just got a comment from Antoine saying that the stream is unstable. If you run into that, you should be able to reload the page and the stream should stabilize for you. So one of the big issues that we have in the last 10 years or so is that marketers, especially digital marketers, have been given a lot of tools by companies such as Google and Facebook to allow them to remarket to people. Remarketing might be a term that you haven't heard very often unless you're in marketing. What remarketing means is if I go to a website and look at a product, when I go to another website, maybe I'll see an advertisement on that website for the product I just looked at. You'll see the same thing on Facebook. If you search for something on Facebook, you may see for the next few days afterwards that you're kind of followed around by advertisements for that thing. This is done by the use of some tracking code in the case of Google, or what's called a tracking pixel in the case of Facebook. For marketers, this is a great thing because there have been studies that say if I, as a marketer, show you something 10 times, then you're going to be aware of it and you have a much higher chance of purchasing what I'm trying to sell you. But from a privacy standpoint, this is terrible. What it means is there is tons and tons of data from large corporations who make their money by trying to sell you things. And they follow you around the internet from website to website, all around Facebook and other social media platforms. And by the information they collect on you, they try and serve you ads that will trigger you to make purchases. As a marketer, it's cool to have a tool that does such a neat thing. But as a person, this is terrifying. And one of the ways you can start to snap this chain of tracking is by being aware of the tools you use to find information on the internet. Now, in some of our other webinars, we've covered some other things you can use, like the browser extension Privacy Badger, and using extensions like HTTPS everywhere, Ghostery. There's a number of really good options that can help you to stop trackers. But especially when we're talking about Google, it's really important that you find another way to find the information you need in a way that's friendly to privacy. And that's where DuckDuckGo comes in. So at this point, I'm going to turn the time over to Mike, and he'll talk to us about DuckDuckGo and the way that enhances our privacy. And again, for any of you that are having problems with the stream, make sure you reload your browser, and that should help.
Awesome, thank you, sir. So jumping right in here, I think it's best to start this conversation by explaining how search engines like Google work. Or more traditional search engines being Yahoo, all those. So in a nutshell, to break this down, the first thing is they record and save all of your search queries. So everything that you type in the little white search box is being recorded. And because of our current privacy laws in the United States, that recorded query will probably be held indefinitely until the end of time. And they are selling this to advertisers, but they also cooperate sometimes eagerly with with law enforcement when requested. So if you're ever the recipient of a FISA warrant, hopefully you're not, but in the case that you are, you know, Google isn't handing over a couple of search queries. They're handing over an entire book of data that they've collected from you. Some giant Lord of the Rings sized volume, you know, with you know, thousands of your most embarrassing and personal and vulnerable searches. The second way is that they track your web history as you browse. So Google owns startups, different ad techs and analytics like DoubleClick, Firebase, Google Analytics, of course, and a bazillion other ad tech products that when you count it up, it gives Google a ton of data about how you use the internet. A recent study showed Google trackers are found on over 76% of the web. So yeah, they're spying on you wherever you go, even without using Google search. They also index your usage from other properties. So it's surprising how many people aren't quite aware of this, but it's common for tech companies to use the data that they harvest from different properties that they own. The reason it's a little bit more sinister in Google's case is that they own some of the most widely used and adopted utilities on the web. So the scale of the data that they're collecting is truly unprecedented. The reach and the fidelity of that detail that they have makes this a unique threat to users. They also buy information from data brokers. I don't know how many people out there are familiar with data brokers. This is a particularly nasty practice where, well, to take a step back, I guess, data brokers are largely faceless corporations that just buy information on people. And then they turn around and sell that information to different companies and advertisers. So as an example, you know, the data sources from like a pharmacy club card or a grocery club card, right there, by purchasing that information, they've got times of days and locations that you shop. Depending on the club card, it can actually say what you've purchased. There are different things that you can use to piece together an individual's identity just based on that information. And then when you pair that with the information from someone's Gmail account, plus what they watch on YouTube, plus what they search for online, it's bananas. So Google takes all of those different data sources and they build a profile of you. To take a step back for a minute, as you were just talking about, when you hear about Google and Facebook being such effective advertisers, this is why right here. This is the reason. If you think about more traditional advertising, something like a magazine ad or a television commercial, something like that, those mediums take a shotgun approach to advertising where they have a product and they just blast ads out to the world indiscriminately. Instead, what they're doing here is they're using targeted ads based on the profiles that they build on you. So if your annual income, for example, is $30,000 a year, and they think that you're in the market to buy a new car, they're going to show you ads for a Honda Civic, not a BMW. So you're seeing Toyotas, not Cadillacs. That's the benefit to them of targeted advertising. So some people ask me, what's wrong with seeing Honda Civics? You know, like I'm a law-abiding person, I have nothing to hide. Why should I care that Google has all this information about me? And while we're talking about search here, you know, I'm using Google as an example, but we could be saying the exact same thing here, as you said earlier about Facebook with their tracking pixels. So why should I care? In general, there's a couple of very real reasons why you should care. The first is that you're locked into filter bubbles. This is aiding some of the fake news that's been going around, where because Google has all this information about you and they want to make search as relevant to you specifically as possible, they give you results based on what they think you want to see, not necessarily what the most accurate information is. Because of this, you get trapped in these bubbles of content that already coincide with your method of with your personal politics and beliefs. The second reason is that the government can abuse its power. So we know from people like Edward Snowden that this is something that I mean is much wider scale than we thought previously. And the Snowden revelations are a great example of this, but nations have literally been conducting espionage on their own people for as long as there have been nations. For whatever reason, if you think, well, you know, not my government, you know, my government has my best interests at heart. Even if that were true, there are dozens of other countries out there who aren't the nicest, who maybe don't have your best interests at heart, with some of these same technical capabilities. So just something to consider there. The online data influences offline issues. So the things that we leverage our privacy for. So that there are things like mortgage records, bank records, whether we get accepted to a school that we wanted. All of these things can be affected by actually the things that we search for. And it's just really insecure. So in general, identity theft is not fun. And when you have all this data about you out in the world, you think about like the Target breach or something like that, where you've got all these different people whose data is now out in the world. The more data that's collected about you in your searches and as you browse, the more potential there is for all of that data to be misused in an attack. So what can I do? You can search privately. So there are different options. Obviously, I work at DuckDuckGo, and we are a search engine that doesn't track you, period. Just across the board, we don't log your sessions at all, so you can browse with privacy and that confidence. So how does DuckDuckGo work? You search, right? Just like you normally would, except without creepy trackers following you. When you go to different websites, every time you go to a site, there's like a referring URL, and that's referred to as search leakage. So when you search, there is a certain amount of information, your user agent, your IP address, things like that are passed on to the new site. DuckDuckGo blocks all that on your behalf. And then we don't log you. So anything that does hit our servers, we just automatically, we don't store any of that. To speak really quickly to the spectrum of privacy threats, I think this is really important to understand where DuckDuckGo fits into things and where private search, how this has a ramification on the wider spectrum of everything. So governments, as we were just talking about earlier, whether it's the United States NSA or British GCHQ, there's a lot of spying going on. And there are reasons why we wouldn't want to give them all of our data. Not to say that they aren't doing tremendous work for us as well, but it's one of those things that it's easier to give out data on an as-needed basis than just to give everything and trust that it'll be kept secure. If we keep going down the line, internet service providers, so Comcast, Verizon, Dish Network, all of your ISPs, they don't just spy on your data, they actually determine how fast to make your connection based on what you're doing with that data. This is one of the central points in the issue of net neutrality. So as an example, let's say you just want to kick back and Netflix and chill. So you kick back, but it's buffering like crazy, and you ask yourself, what's going on? Maybe your connection sucks, or maybe your connection's just fine, and your ISP happens to be Verizon. That's also a possibility. And Verizon owns a competitor to Netflix called Go90. And they want to make their service look more appealing to you, so they slow down Netflix to entice you to go to Go90. At the end of the day, these types of tactics are a privacy issue, and those bits and bytes that you pay for, I mean, it's your business. You've paid for that data, you know, like it's your business what you're doing on the internet, not your ISPs. There are, when we look at networks, two common kinds of privacy threats. The first are hackers, obviously, who want your data, and the second are employers who want your data. To me, there's not much of a difference between an IT manager reading my email or a hacker reading my email. It kind of sucks either way. Either way, your privacy is getting screwed without taking the proper precautions there. When it comes to operating system, you know, the big threats, ransomware, malware, viruses, and a lot of this comes in the form of phishing attacks where a user clicks an erroneous link, or they give unintentionally give information to an attacker, or unwittingly download some malware. And browsers. So since web browsers are our vehicle to the day-to-day internet, they're especially vulnerable to attack. When I think personally of all the different potential privacy threats, browsers are uniquely scary just because of all the sensitive information that you type into them. Passwords, logins, addresses. There's a ton of trackers out there that are online watching you do all that. And search, in my opinion, is definitely the holy grail of privacy threats, because the things we search for paint a very detailed picture of ourselves. So if you can remember back in 2006-ish, 2007, somewhere in there, AOL released a bunch of their user data. I don't know if you recall this, but it was something ridiculous, like 700,000 users that they released. And they just literally said, here are 20 million search keywords. It's anonymized, don't worry, go have fun. Do good researchy things with this information. And within a couple of days, people were able to identify specific individuals from that anonymized search data, which shows that it's not really that anonymous. And needless to say, AOL got sued, but it shows that the power of search, you know, since we tell them everything, makes it especially vulnerable when it comes to privacy. So anyway, DuckDuckGo is committed to making these first two categories, search and the browser, more private. But obviously our search only covers this first section. So essentially we had to build something completely new to cover the browser space. What we wanted to do specifically was to extend the privacy protections that you get using our search engine out to the entire browser. We wanted every site on the internet essentially to respect your privacy like we do, or at least as close as possible. So what we came up with was the DuckDuckGo privacy browser. On desktop, this takes the form of security plugin that you can add to whatever browser that you're already familiar with, whichever one you already know and love. There's a browser plugin available for it. For iOS and Android, we took that a step further and built an entire browser with privacy in mind from the ground up. So things that this does: it blocks trackers as you browse. It forces an HTTPS connection. It warns users of sites with shady privacy practices and shady privacy policies. And then it gives them a privacy grade. So you can see here in this screen, we've got, oh, we got a question. Hey, DuckDuckGo man, can I ask you something, please? You go ahead and ask. I'm going to keep going. So we see in this first screen here, up in the address bar, there's a little B icon. And this is a screenshot, not to beat up on Mashable, but just I took this 2 days ago just to show as an example. When you tap that B up at the top, this panel slides down to show you the status of that. So when you can see when the privacy protection is disabled, you can see we've got 18 tracker networks found, 3 major tracker networks found, some questionable privacy practices. Turning this on forces a more secure connection and blocks those trackers out. You can see going forward, it gives you, why is the app on Android so different from iOS? I think the iOS looks so much better. It's a great question. So we decided early on to play more to each individual platform strengths. So in design, there are different design conventions for each. We decided to try to follow those conventions as closely as possible to make it more of a native experience for users. So the things like the typography used, for example, different typography based on the best practices for each, and with that comes different nuances. But that's basically the answer, is just different platforms. You can see here, we list out all the different trackers that are currently being blocked and the companies that own them. We give information about the SSL certificate, so you can see details on that. And we keep a global leaderboard of the top offenders that keeps a tally, essentially, just as you're browsing. This is just in the background, just collecting information about all the nasty trackers on the web. And the fun little tool here, when you're done with your session, you can hit this button. And that fire button will literally burn up all of your search history and any tabs that are open, just to keep everything nice and clean. And this is available again as a browser plugin for Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. And it's available for mobile on Android and iOS. And back to questions. Looks like, thanks for the answer. Why does it not support Tor browser? So that's also a great question. So Tor is a different animal, and obviously with the way that Tor works is completely different. Even though the framework is based on Firefox, there's a lot more going on under the hood, rather. It's not a direct apples to apples. When it comes to Tor, Tor is also important. VPNs are great for protecting your privacy. This does handle slightly a different use case, which is we're going more for a seamless all-in-one approach that can get people away from trackers within their typical browsing habits. So rather than having to adopt Tor or something like that, whether we will have a version for this specifically for Tor browser in the future, I can't answer that now, but it is something that's been discussed. Why is there not the ability to unblock individual trackers that may have been blocked in the case that something is breaking on the site? So there is. So both the mobile and desktop version both have whitelists. So if there is something that is breaking, not common with ours, but common with a lot of tracker blockers out there, web fonts. That's a pretty common one, that a lot of web fonts end up being broken. So if there's something that isn't loading on a particular site, you can whitelist it. Individual trackers, that's correct.
One of the big advantages, I've always had problems with Privacy Badger breaking sites. I have to go through one by one and play around with the different trackers. I've had a much better experience with the DuckDuckGo extension.
Well, that's great to hear. And it's not to say that those other ones aren't great. I love Privacy Badger. I love HTTPS everywhere. The value in DuckDuckGo is that it's kind of an all-in-one. So rather than having different plugins that might conflict with each other, as they sometimes do, rather than having different ones that you have to maintain and update and make sure that it's with every, or works with every browser version, it's just nice having everything contained in one.
Yeah.
Where does VPN fit in private browsing? So I can actually show you visually. Let's see. If we go back to this slide here. So when it comes to private browsing, you are mainly within these two areas here. So you're searching for things, you're jumping around on the web and staying within your browser. The VPN comes into play, well, it's a benefit outside the browser. So more in this territory, it's not that you need one or the other. Both are great. They just address different things. So a VPN is not going to be, for example, blowing away your tabs or your sessions when you're done. Like that's a network safeguard, not a local safeguard to your browser. So different things. They both work great together.
And I love this idea of a spectrum of privacy threats, because different tools work to help you maintain your privacy in different ways. So, the SpiderOak's tools, we really don't do anything with browsers or search. Mostly where our tools come in are on the ISP level and the network level by protecting the things that you send across a network with encryption, as well as on an OS level, right? But that's different than your web browsing. So you need to have a different tactic to protect against those different threats.
And with that said, also, if we work backwards on this privacy spectrum, if hypothetically the government were to issue some sort of a subpoena for your specific search data, there's a number of ways they could do that. They could try to go through the ISP. They could go straight to search engines such as Google and say, hey, give us everything that you've got on this person. In the case of DuckDuckGo, since we don't log anything, since we don't store any of the information at this level, we would literally have no information to give law enforcement. That's one of the big benefits here. So if anyone does come asking, we literally have nothing to give. So in relation to disconnect, disconnect is one of the sources that we use. We use multiple sources though, so it's not exclusively that. That's probably why you're seeing a difference in what we block versus disconnect. It's also important to mention that this is not like a full ad blocker. These are blocking the nasty little trackers that follow you around the web. So if SpiderOak decided to have an ad somewhere on their website, this would not be blocking that ad. It would be blocking SpiderOak if they decide to be creepy and track you around the web. So there's definitely a difference, which they would never do. Do you consider killing cookies essential to privacy, even with your extension enabled? So this is a great question. If I can take half a second to talk about threat models, I think this is a great time for that. So there is not an all-in-one solution to privacy. And the reason there's not an all-in-one solution is that everyone has different needs for their privacy. So what's right for my own privacy needs may not be right for Adam's, may not be right for Edward Snowden's, right? Like there's a lot more on the line for some people than others, and there's a lot more the things that you're trying to protect, the things that might be trying to attack you, vary wildly from person to person. Do I personally consider killing cookies essential to privacy, even with your extension enabled? I personally have my browser set so that everything is dumped when I close it. To each their own, but that's what I do. What happens when two blockers are running at the same time? Both show counts of block trackers. What's really happening? So this is a good question. And without knowing the specific case here, I can't really answer that. I can say that there are different conflicts that can happen when you've got more than one running at the same time. Sometimes, not that they will cancel each other out necessarily, but there are some cases where one will throw an error because of the actions of another. Behind the scenes, I can't really speak, unfortunately, to what Ghostery and DuckDuckGo is doing at the same time. I can look into that. I can follow up, Greg. What are the questions?
As any of you write your questions, one of the big takeaways I hope you get from this is, while the internet's kind of a scary place and it can feel like there's, it's easy to feel hopeless, but that's not the case. And tools like DuckDuckGo are one of the, kind of an arrow in your quiver of ways that you protect yourself. It's so important to be active. The protection of everything in your life relies on you, and you need to choose good tools to do it. And so I hope that you feel a little bit more empowered having learned about this, because that's what's really important. This isn't a hopeless battle. The battle for privacy and security online, it can be won by normal people. You can protect yourself, but you have to be active in the way that you do it.
And every little bit helps. Just because you can't live your life in a Faraday cage out in the middle of nowhere doesn't mean that nothing is worth pursuing. So these little things, these little browser plugins, they do a lot with very little investment on your end. Does the extension block fingerprinting techniques? Which ones? It does. I mean, as does DuckDuckGo itself. That's probably a bigger question than I can answer right here, but the short answer is yes.
Yeah, not that DuckDuckGo guarantees anonymity. That's an important point to make. Anonymity is really difficult, and so if what you're looking for is anonymity, you need to go somewhere else, because it's a much bigger conversation than any one tool. All right, any final questions from anybody? Well, if not, Mike, thanks so much for coming on today, and thanks for the work that you and DuckDuckGo, the whole DuckDuckGo team do. You're doing important work. We sure appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. This was fun. How do I support DuckDuckGo? You use it. There you go.
Yep. All right. We want to have more webinars like this. So if any of you have suggestions, please feel free to contact SpiderOak's team. You can contact us through support.spideroak.com. We'd love to hear your suggestions on different webinars or other guests that we can bring on. My preference is to bring on a rock star like Mike, because he knows a lot more than I do. But if you ever have any suggestions or any questions that SpiderOak's support team can help with, even if it's not related to our products, please reach out to us. We want to be a resource for you. All right. Well, thanks so much, and thanks again, Mike.
Thanks, friends.
Hope you have a good day.